I gave him 12 years of my life. What did I do to him? Where will I go from here now?
She stood in the rain with one suitcase, and the only thing louder than the storm outside was the voice still ringing in her head, the voice of the man she had given 11 years of her life to, telling her she was ugly, she was fat, she was a burden, she was nothing, and she needed to get out of his house. She left without screaming. She left without begging. She simply picked up the one bag she had packed in the 20 minutes it took her to understand that he meant it this time, and she walked out into the dark and disappeared. And 90 days later, 90 days, this woman, the one he had thrown away like she had nothing left to offer, became the most talked about woman in the entire city. So the question you need to sit with before we go any further is this: what exactly did she do in those 90 days? Because the answer is going to stay with you long after this video ends. Her name, for the purposes of this story, is Serena Voss. She was 47 years old when the marriage ended, and she had been living inside it, truly living inside it, in the way that slowly swallows a person whole, for just over a decade. She had met David Langford at a charity gala in a large American city in the fall of 2011. He was polished, self-assured, and he had a talent for making whoever he was speaking to feel like the only person in the room. Serena was a graphic designer with her own small consultancy, a sharp creative mind, and a laugh that her college roommates still describe the same way every time someone asks them about her, the kind that could quiet a room and then fill it back up again. She was building something real. A business she had started from her apartment, a client list she had grown through referrals and reputation, a life that was moving in a direction she had chosen. And then she met David. And slowly, quietly, over years that moved the way water moves through stone, she disappeared. What happened to Serena inside that marriage is not a story without precedent? It is, in fact, a story that is far more common than most people are prepared to believe. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 1 in 3 women, nearly 43.5 million Americans, have experienced contact sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetimes. CDC, but those are the cases that leave evidence the eye can find. What is far harder to count, far harder to name, and in many ways far more destructive over the long term, is what researchers now call coercive control. A pattern of psychological manipulation, so gradual, so carefully threaded into the ordinary fabric of a shared daily life, that many of the women living inside it do not recognize it for what it is until they are already years deep, and the person they used to be has become someone they can barely remember. Continuous psychological manipulation and control can leave survivors unsure of their own preferences, their capabilities, and their self-value. CAWC, it does not announce itself with a dramatic moment. It does not come with bruises or police reports or a single scene you can point to and say, "There, that was the moment everything changed." It comes with a comment at the dinner table, with a look across a room that lasts a second too long, with a hand on your arm and a voice that tells you, very calmly, that the version of yourself you brought into this relationship is not quite what was expected. The first comment David made came 18 months into the marriage. Serena had come downstairs dressed for a work event she had been looking forward to, wearing a green dress she had chosen carefully. David looked at her once and said, without raising his voice, that the fabric was not doing her any favors and she might want to change before they left. She changed. She has spoken about that moment publicly in the years since, and she is precise about one thing every time she describes it. It did not feel, in that instant, like the beginning of anything. It felt like a comment about a dress. That is exactly how these things begin, and that is precisely what makes them so effective. A 2026 study published in the journal Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience found that through repeated patterns of manipulation, control, criticism, and invalidation, emotional abuse progressively alters an individual's self-concept and interpersonal expectations. Frontiers, not through a single devastating blow, but through accumulation. One comment becomes a pattern becomes a voice. And eventually, that voice stops belonging to the person saying the words and starts belonging to you. It takes up residence in your own mind and speaks in your own language, and that is the point at which it becomes almost impossible to fight, because you are no longer fighting him, You are fighting yourself. Over the years that followed, Serena Voss stopped wearing color. She stopped pitching new clients without checking with David first. She stopped suggesting restaurants on the nights they went out together. She stopped taking work calls at the dinner table, stopped talking about her projects in the way she once had expansively, with the specific kind of pride that belongs to someone who knows their work is genuinely good. She made herself smaller, degree by careful degree, the way you adjust a dial over a long period of time, until she fit inside the dimensions of the space he had decided she was permitted to occupy. Researchers who study this pattern have a framework for what happens to a person's sense of identity inside this kind of relationship. The tactics used in coercive control bear a striking similarity to what sociologist Irving Goffman described as mortification, the systematic attacks on identity that occur in total institutions. ResearchGate, Goffman was writing about prisons. He was writing about the mechanisms used to strip a person of their individual self and replace it with compliance. The context is different. The mechanism is the same. And the outcome, a woman who has forgotten who she was before she entered a particular room, is identical. What is essential to understand about Serena and about women in situations like hers is that she was not a woman without resources, without intelligence, without self-awareness. She ran a consultancy. She had a degree. She had friends who loved her and a sister who lived across the city and would have answered the phone at any hour. Research into coercive control trauma makes clear that victim survivors experience specific emotional harm shaped by processes of threat and restraint, not as the result of a single distressing event, but as a consequence of subtle and sustained harm in a relationship that also provides security and support. Say, journals that final phrase carries everything. The relationship also provides security and support. There are good years inside these marriages. There are trips and dinners and moments of genuine warmth. And it is that alternation between the erosion and the comfort, between the comment and the apology, between the cold and the warmth, that creates a kind of psychological disorientation so complete that leaving feels less like an escape and more like stepping off a ledge into open air. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reports that an average of 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States, more than 12 million women and men over the course of a single year. National Domestic Violence Hotline, and that number captures only what can be reported and measured. The psychological casualties, the women sitting across dinner tables in houses that look completely fine from the outside, do not appear in any database at all. On the night of October 14th, on a Tuesday that had given no advance warning of what it was about to become, David came home from a business meeting that had not gone the way he had planned. He sat down at the table where Serena had made dinner. He looked at her for a moment in silence, and then he said what he said. She has repeated it publicly, word for word, because she wants the accuracy of it on the record and she wants no room for interpretation. He told her that when he looked at her, he felt nothing. He told her she had let herself go. He called her ugly. He called her fat. He said she was not the woman he had married and he was finished pretending to be happy. Then he told her to leave. And she did. She took one bag. She had $300 in a personal checking account he had never known about, money she had been setting aside in small amounts over the previous 2 years, the way a person does when some part of them has already begun to understand that a day like this is coming even when the rest of them is not ready to admit it. She drove to her sister Maya's apartment on the other side of the city. She sat down on the edge of the guest bed in the clothes she had left the house in. She did not eat. She did not cry. She did not answer her phone. Maya stood in the doorway and watched her, and what Maya said later, what she has said publicly every time she has been asked about that night, is that the thing that frightened her was not that Serena was falling apart. It was that she was not. She was completely still, Maya said, like she was calculating something. What Serena was doing, though she would not have called it this at the time, sitting on the edge of that bed in a room that smelled of her sister's laundry detergent and a life that was not her own, was taking stock. Not of what she had lost. She was taking stock of what was still there, of what 11 years of gradual, quiet erosion had not been able to fully reach. And there was something there, not confidence, not yet, not clarity. Something smaller and more stubborn than either of those things, a residual knowledge, intact underneath all of it, of who she had been before she walked into that marriage. She had kept a journal for years. David had never known about it. It was not an affirmation journal with printed prompts and motivational headers. It was not a gratitude list. It was something more specific, and in retrospect, something that would prove more important than anything else she owned. Every morning, in short entries that were never meant to be read by anyone, she had written down what she knew to be true about herself, what she was capable of, what she had built and done and figured out before she became Mrs. Langford. She would later call it, first privately and then publicly, her evidence file. Evidence against the verdict that had been slowly handed down across the length of a decade. That night, at her sister's kitchen table, she opened the journal. She read every entry, all the way back to the beginning, and then she sat in the quiet for a very long time. And she made a decision. The first morning after she left, she woke before 5. She had not set an alarm. She lay in the dark of the guest room for a few minutes, and then she got up, put on the only pair of running shoes she had packed, went downstairs without making coffee, walked out the front door of her sister's building, and ran. She has been asked about this decision many times since, and her answer is always the same. She was not running to lose weight. She was not running because of what David had said. She ran because it was the 1 hour in any given day where no one could look at her and tell her what they saw. The science behind this choice, made intuitively by a woman who was not thinking about science, is well documented. Physical activity after emotional trauma does not merely improve mood through endorphin release, though it does that too. Research published across multiple peer-reviewed journals confirms that regular exercise after psychological abuse helps survivors rebuild what clinicians describe as a sense of bodily agency. The felt understanding that your body belongs to you, that it responds to what you ask of it, that it is not a subject to be evaluated by someone else, but an instrument that is yours to direct. Taking good care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, socially, and spiritually, through exercise, adequate sleep, and reaching out to trusted family, forms a foundational part of the recovery process from abuse. Baylor College of Medicine, Serena was not following a protocol. She was following something older than that, some knowledge the body holds about what it needs when the mind has been under occupation for a long time. On day 2, she made 3 phone calls. She had a list she had written in the journal the night before, a list of clients she had quietly let go during the marriage, clients she had stepped back from because David had opinions about the hours she kept, and the attention she gave to work that was not connected to him. She did not call to pitch. She called to have a conversation. 3 calls. 3 people who had worked with her before the marriage had reshaped her schedule and quieted her ambition. 2 of them called her back the same day. The 3rd called back the morning after. None of those conversations produced a contract immediately. That was not the point, and Serena understood that. The point was to remind herself, through the act of being received warmly by people who had valued her work, that her professional identity was not a thing David had been able to actually take. He had been able to suppress it. He had not been able to erase it. By day 14, she had a second-hand laptop she had bought through an online marketplace listing for $180. She set it up on a desk in the corner of the guest room, a desk that had previously held her sister's boxes of tax documents and craft supplies, and she began rebuilding her portfolio. She worked nights after her sister went to sleep and early mornings before Maya woke up for work. She rebuilt from memory, recreating project presentations and design samples, reaching back through the years to collect evidence of what she had done and repackage it into something current and professional. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Social Psychology in 2025 found that for women recovering from the psychological impact of difficult marriages, journaling, purposeful creative work, and what researchers called embodied practice formed a core part of the identity reconstruction process. The specific work of recovering the parts of the self that had been set aside or suppressed during the relationship. Serena did not know this study existed. She was simply doing what felt necessary. But what felt necessary and what the research describes turned out to be, in almost every detail, the same thing. By day 30, she had signed a small contract. It was not the kind of thing that would change the trajectory of her finances in any meaningful sense. It was a branding refresh for a local business, modest, contained, 2 weeks of work for a fee that would not have impressed anyone. But it was a contract she had earned on her own, from a client she had approached on her own, on a laptop she had bought with her own money, sitting in a borrowed room in a city that did not yet know her name. She deposited the payment into the account with the $300, and she sat with that for a moment, and then she went for a run. Her sister noticed the change before Serena did. Maya said later that the first visible signal was color. Serena started wearing it again somewhere around the 5th week. Nothing dramatic. A blue sweater she had borrowed from Maya's closet. A pair of earrings she had kept in the side pocket of the bag she had packed on the night she left. It sounds like a small thing because it is a small thing, and Maya has said in every conversation since that she understood completely why someone hearing this story from the outside might not grasp why it mattered. But if you had watched Serena Voss move through the world for the 8 years before that night in October, you would know why it mattered. You would understand that the absence of color had not been a fashion choice. It had been an adaptation, and its return was not a fashion choice either. It was information. On day 46, Serena walked into the offices of a boutique branding agency in the city's commercial district, wearing a blazer she had found at a consignment shop 3 days earlier for $22. She had prepared a pitch deck over the previous 2 weeks, working on it in the evenings after the contract work was done, refining it the way she had once refined everything before the marriage had taught her to shrink her ambitions to a more manageable size. The agency was small but well regarded, the kind of firm that worked with clients across the hospitality, retail, and professional services sectors, and had a reputation for creative work that was both distinctive and commercially effective. Serena had researched them for a week before reaching out. She had studied their portfolio, identified the gap she believed she could fill, and built her pitch around that gap specifically rather than around a general presentation of her skills. She walked out of that meeting with a contract worth 6 times what she had ever earned on her own while married to David Langford. She did not call anyone to tell them. She did not post about it. She drove back to her sister's apartment, wrote 3 sentences in the journal, set the pen down, and went for a run. What happened next was not something Serena planned, engineered, or anticipated. On day 75, a local magazine, the kind of publication that covers city culture, design, business, and the people who move through all 3, was putting together a feature on women who were reshaping professional creative spaces in the city. A photographer had been sent to the branding agency to shoot the firm's partners for the piece. Serena was in the building that afternoon for a client review meeting. The photographer saw her in the hallway, spoke to her briefly, and asked if he could take her portrait. She said yes. The photograph ran as a full page in the magazine's next issue. The caption beneath it read, "Serena Voss, designer. Currently redefining what it means to build something from scratch." She had no idea the photograph was coming. The magazine had sent no advance notice, no proof, no request for biographical detail. It simply ran, and the city saw it. The magazine hit stands on day 88. By day 89, her inbox had 247 unread messages. By day 90, a photograph of the magazine page had been posted to social media by someone Serena had never met, with a caption that read simply, "This is what a comeback looks like." That post was shared 11,000 times by the end of the week. Women who had never met Serena Voss, who did not know her name before that photograph appeared in their feeds, were writing long paragraphs about her in comment sections. They were recognizing something, not the specifics of her story, which most of them did not yet know, but the shape of it, the way a person can disappear inside a life that looks ordinary from the outside and then reappear, changed, as something the world was not expecting. That recognition is not accidental. It connects to something documented across years of research into why certain stories about women's recovery from psychological harm travel the way they do. Because they give shape and language to an experience that millions of people are living but do not have words for yet. There were voices, once the story began to circulate, that pushed back. There are always voices that push back, and some of what they said deserved a fair hearing. Some observers pointed out that Serena had always had professional skills to return to, that her situation was not equivalent to that of women who leave abusive relationships with no financial resources and no existing career to reclaim. That is a legitimate distinction, and it is worth sitting with. The research on women leaving abusive relationships makes clear that economic dependence is one of the most significant barriers to exit, that women who leave abusive marriages often must shoulder enormous financial responsibility alone, and that the belief that they can survive independently is itself a critical turning point in the decision to go. Science Direct, Serena had $300 and a second-hand laptop. She also had a skill set and a professional network, however dormant. The fact that she had those things does not diminish what she rebuilt. It simply means her story is one particular story within a much larger landscape of stories, most of which do not end with a magazine photograph and 11,000 shares, and all of which deserve to be told. David Langford did not respond publicly for 11 days after the magazine ran. When he did, it was in a brief statement to a local business publication. He said he was proud of Serena's success. He said the divorce had been a mutual decision. He said that the accounts of what had been said on the night of October 14th had been exaggerated and taken out of context. People who read the statement noticed one thing in particular. He did not say the words had not been spoken. He said they had been exaggerated. That is a specific and carefully chosen distinction, and the people who had been following the story noticed it immediately. 3 months after the magazine ran, on what would have been the 12th anniversary of her marriage to David, Serena Voss gave a talk at a women's professional conference held in a downtown hotel ballroom. She did not use David's name. She did not need to. She talked about the mirror, about the years she had spent adjusting what she saw in it to match someone else's assessment of her. She talked about what it means to disappear so gradually that you do not notice it happening until the day you stand in the rain outside a house that was supposed to be your home and realize you cannot remember the last time you looked like yourself. She talked about the evidence file and about the specific and unusual courage it requires to maintain, across years of being told otherwise, a private record of what you know to be true about who you are. The talk was recorded on someone's phone and uploaded to a video platform that evening. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed 400,000 times. The email she had drafted and never sent on the night she left, the one with the subject line that read "Dear David, watch what happens next," had, in a way she had not planned and could not have predicted, delivered itself. Serena Voss is not a perfect story, and she will be the first to tell you that. There were mornings inside those 90 days, and she has spoken about this clearly and without romanticizing any of it, where she did not run. Where the laptop stayed closed and the journal stayed shut, and she sat on the edge of the guest bed at 2 in the afternoon still in her pajamas, wondering whether what David had said was simply the truth, and she had been too proud or too stubborn to accept it while she had the chance. Those mornings were real. They were not a detour from the story. They were part of it. Research shows that recovery after the breakdown of a significant relationship follows a predictable pattern. An acute phase of intense emotional distress, followed by gradual stabilization, followed eventually by what clinicians describe as integration, where the person develops an identity that extends beyond the relationship they left. Serenium wellness, that process is not linear. It does not move forward in a straight line at a steady pace. It moves the way most real things move, with setbacks and reversals and days where the ground feels less solid than it did the day before, and then mornings where something shifts and you lace up your shoes and you go back out. What she held onto, on the worst mornings, was not a plan. She did not have a 10-step strategy. She did not have a therapist she was seeing regularly or a support group she was attending or a mentor who was guiding her through the process. What she had was the journal. The evidence file. The accumulated record of a self that had survived 11 years of being told it was not enough, and had kept writing anyway. And somewhere in those pages, across all those mornings, she had sat with her coffee and her pen and written 3 sentences about who she was. She had preserved something that no one had been able to take, the knowledge of who she had been before she walked into that marriage. Not who she wanted to be, not who she planned to become, who she had already been. And it was that knowledge, specific and unromantic, and grounded in the concrete evidence of things she had actually done, that she returned to on the mornings when David's voice in her head was louder than her own. The question this story leaves us with is not really about Serena Voss. It is not about David Langford either. The question it leaves us with is the one that lives at the center of any story about a person who is told, repeatedly, and over a long period of time by someone whose opinion they have trusted, that they are less than what they are. The question is about the mirror you have been looking into, and whose voice has been narrating what you see in it. The question is about whether somewhere, underneath whatever has been said to you, and about you and over you, there is an evidence file you have been keeping, a private record of what you know to be true about yourself that no one has been able to fully reach. Serena Voss found hers on the edge of a guest bed in the rain-soaked dark of an October night with $300 and one suitcase. And 90 days later, a city that had never heard her name could not stop saying it. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if this story reached something in you today, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because next week, we go inside the story of a woman who discovered that the man she had been married to for 17 years had been living an entirely different life, with a different name, in a different city, with a different family. And the moment she found out is something you will not see coming.